Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hi, Joel and Antonia. My name is Amy and I live in Decatur, Georgia. I was recently diagnosed as an ENTJ after a profiling session with Hans, and I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it. I thought I was an INFJ because that's how I've always tested. My question is about perspectives. I use this process to get inside people's heads and figure out where they're coming from and what they want. I think due to childhood trauma and growing up female in the Deep South, I have been trying to jerry-rig extroverted feeling, which is not in my stack, out of the functions that are in my stack. I don't see myself using perspectives in a typical ENTJ fashion for future pacing and strategic planning. So I'm wondering, in developing my Copilot, is it worthwhile trying to use it in these ways that are not familiar to me? And if so, how might I go about that? Thanks so much. I love your work.
Thanks, Amy, for the question, and congratulations on finding your best fit type of ENTJ. And I can understand if you're in a cultural situation where maybe you're encouraged to grow in a way that is not natural to you, not natural to how your mind is wired. Well, that can bring up a lot of questions. When you finally settle on your best fit type, it's like, well, now what? How should I be thinking about this? Is it okay to develop this in the way that is recommended? And I don't necessarily relate to some of the things that maybe have been talked about with ENTJs. And is that from my background? What do you guys have to say about this?
Yeah, before we launch into recommendations for developing introverted intuition or perspectives as a co-pilot or auxiliary function, for those of you who have ENTJ preferences, I would like to make a note that it really can be very confusing to read descriptions of ENTJs and to identify with them, because there's a certain collection of types. Well, actually, I would say all the types have lots of stereotypes around them, lots of very narrow profiles written, particularly because they're describing people who fall in the center of a bell curve. Like there's all these different flavors of each type, but there's one that really sticks out, is very obvious, is almost like the prototype. And for ENTJs, that prototype doesn't have a lot of feminine qualities. So when a woman has ENTJ preferences, it's hard to find descriptions that really speak to them. And particularly if you're in a culture, and I would argue that's globally, but there are some cultures that are even more insistent on women showing up with extroverted feeling or harmony characteristics. And I think another piece of this, and by the way, you're not alone. I have seen so many women with TJ, particularly ETJ preferences, believe that they are FJs because the descriptions around extroverted thinking or effectiveness feel very harsh. They feel like they're not particularly considerate.
Uncaring, maybe?
Yeah, bulldozing, and maybe even without some ethics. I think that that's a piece that comes into a lot of descriptions, that ETJs lack ethics or an ethical core, that they'll just do whatever they want to. And if you're an ETJ woman who has a strong tie to, your ethics, or an ETJ man that has a strong tie to your ethical core, then some of those descriptions are very off-putting and they don't really resonate. So I can appreciate why you would feel or have some of this confusion. I also think we've recently talked about it in a couple different places. If you have some trauma from your past, and so you've been taught to be sensitive to people around you who might be angry, like you had a very angry or maybe emotionally distressing parent or influence in your life, where you taught yourself to use every tool you had to notice when that person enters the room, or, tap into what they're feeling. Mom's not feeling good today. I need to note that. Dad's not doing that well. I need to note that. It feels like you're picking up empathetic qualities. And we do that as a survival technique. And so if that's something that happens for somebody who has ENTJ preferences, then it can very much look like they're a different personality type. Or if you've got an ENTJ in your life and you feel very different from them, I have a very, very good friend who believed she was an INFJ until recently. Come to find out she has ENTJ preferences, and one of the reasons why she didn't realize it is because her father has ENTJ preferences, and he is a very different person than she is. And so that can also show up. Now, all of that said, let's talk about how to develop introverted intuition or perspectives as a co-pilot or auxiliary as an ENTJ. And it sounds like you probably have been using your perspectives function in maybe one of the ways that we described before, getting into other people's minds. Maybe really identifying with how that function is described for INFJs in the sense of trying to figure out where somebody else is at emotionally and what's happening with relationships. And if that was, again, a survival technique for you, then maybe you felt like that's how you had to develop that function. That said, the reason why introverted intuition or perspectives is described as future pacing and strategic for ENTJs is because all other things being equal, that is usually how it ends up manifesting for them. And so that's not necessarily a prescription, like you have to use it that way. It's more of a diagnostic of how it's often used. That said, there is some value in using it in that way, and you might find yourself really enjoying it. My brother, who has ENTJ preferences, he's a writer. He uses that function for world building. He goes inside, he develops all of these very fleshed out creative worlds inside of his mind, and then he puts, pen to paper and he ends up writing novels around it. That's also a very valid way of using introverted intuition for an ENTJ. It's served him very well. So it doesn't just have to be strategic long into the future, figuring out what technologies are coming down the pike or figuring out how you're going to mastermind or take over businesses as a CEO. Like, there's a lot of different flavors of this. And I would recommend you do the one that feels the most sort of authentic and fun, right? Use it in an enjoyable way, not just getting inside other people's minds to try to figure out their emotional temperature. But what if you could detether it from people? What if you could tether it to world building or resource generation or plotting where you're going to go next? That might actually be in a more enjoyable use of that function for you.
I think ENTJs are also very equipped to use this perspectives process for abstractions of value, resource, and energy at really high levels. So it doesn't even have to be in the future. It could just be in the present. David Allen has the book, Getting Things Done. He's probably an ETJ. Talks a lot about the difference between tasks and projects. And, it's a real basic understanding of this that if you're an ENTJ preferences, you probably already understand a difference between task and project. Projects are an assembly of a bunch of tasks. And most people can't really think in terms of projects very easily. They think in terms of doing individual tasks, but project managers think in projects, right? So it's a more sophisticated way of seeing tasks assembled. Well, obviously, ENTJs can go way beyond just the project level. They can get up into entire businesses, industries, and then you get up to global levels of seeing entire economies of scale moving, energies moving between countries and continents and industries between these types of things. And I think that abstraction level thinking is also very available to NTJs, which is really exciting because we need people to be tapped into these higher abstractions of how value moves through the world.
Yeah, and you can take that same idea and apply it to a lot of different styles of industry. Like, it doesn't have to just be business. It can be an understanding of that level of scale and how energies move in any sort of context. I talked about how my brother uses it for world building and creating science fiction novels. I also have noticed that people with ENTJ preferences are really good at doing that same thing that you're talking about in things like, being dungeon masters for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it doesn't have to necessarily be something that's like that intense. And if you're not that interested in business, then don't apply it there. Although I don't know many ENTJs that don't at least have some interest in business, right? Like some interest in that. I know other ENTJs who use it for charity work. We have an ENTJ woman who is part of our Profiler training group who discovered she was an ENTJ while going through the process, thought she was an ENFJ. And she uses it for charity work and to really help, herd cats, basically, and mobilize groups of people for these projects that are around things that she loves, like her own charitable work and her own, the things that she's really an advocate for. And so she's applied this same understanding of energies and resource management and building something bigger into something that really means something to her as an individual. So you can really apply it to anything you want, but it is an understanding. It's a fundamental understanding of scale, really. How do these energies scale? How do I make them bigger? I can do it in the real world. I can do it in a fantasy world, but it doesn't matter. How do I understand this concept of scale? So I would recommend that you play around with that and let yourself enjoy the process, right? Let yourself enjoy what it means to have scale and to world build and see larger energies at play. One of the best ways to do it, particularly if you have ENTJ preferences or ENJ preferences, is to find context where you can shut off sensory information. And it's because that extroverted sensing or sensation 10-year-old or tertiary function, particularly for ENJs, is very seductive to keep you busy and constantly mobilized in an action. So I always recommend my go-to recommendation for this is a sensory deprivation tank. In the United States, at least, there are float tanks. They call them float tanks or sensory deprivation tanks. They're all over the country, and they'll even be in smaller towns. I would recommend finding one. Going in for at least an hour. If you can hack it 90 minutes is fantastic, but go in for an hour. It might take a couple of different tries. Sometimes you don't really get a really solid experience until like the second or third time you go in, but see where your mind takes you, right? That's the great thing about introverted intuition or perspectives is that it guides you, right? It takes you on a ride of intuition. You get to tap into the collective unconscious. You get to tap into the future. You get to tap into your own mind's patterns. You get to tap into other people's minds patterns. And it can go literally anywhere. It can go into that world building like I talked about. So let it take you on a ride, and it will tell you what those interests are that are natural to you. And I would follow that and allow it to go, follow where it naturally, organically takes you, and then develop it based on the things that feel good. Not feel good like in an indulgent way, but feel right. Like, this is the thing that I'm naturally interested in, so I'm going to go way down this rabbit's hole because that feels right to me. And it doesn't really matter where it goes.
All intuitives also need high-quality intuitive conversation. So the other recommendation is, as you're doing some of this rumination quietly to yourself, as you have the ideas, bring them out and find other people who can have that kind of intuitive conversation, that abstract thinking styled conversation, like the what ifs, the deep insights, and the abstractions, right? All that stuff it's really hard to play in that world for a period of time, but you're equipped as ENTJ. You have this part of your mind that is very well versed in these kinds of conversations. So find those communities. If you can reach out to people, maybe in Personality Hacker. I mean, there's a lot of people that love intuitive conversation that hang around our community. Maybe you find some people in this community that you can connect with and share your ideas with, and who knows, maybe partnerships or other collaborations could even come from that. So we wish you well in your journey. We're excited for you that you finally landed on your best fit type. And just want to really thank you so much for the question, Amy. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.